You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Hey, Power Athlete Nation. I'm John Welborn, and I'm here with another podcast for the amazing Power Athlete Radio. And I'm joined today by Mr. Mike Sarraille. Thanks for being here, bud.
That's the only time I've ever heard your voice inflect like that.
All of a sudden have an inflection, and it's almost like I'm doing old radio ads. I think it's hilarious. I've done so many of these intros, and I'm like, hey, I'm John Welborn, and all this weird inflection that I don't really ever have any other time in my life.
I still catch myself with certain inflections. I'm like, why the fuck am I doing that?
Is it just when you're doing the podcast?
No, like when I thank somebody, like, oh, thank you so much. Like, just, hey, thank you. I don't know why I do it.
Do you have to do it because you're from you're from Northern California? You're a San Francisco guy. So maybe that's just part of the inflection when you're from San Francisco.
Hey, I mean, San Francisco is a great place. My father used to say he'd rather fly to Chicago during the mid of winter than fly to Southern California. He despised Southern California. I mean, my sister went to USC. Yeah. It was back when this had to be 80s. There was a few gang bang incidents where I think one sorority girl was shot and brought her home that semester. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we used to, USC, University of South Crenshaw. I mean, you're going to live right in the middle of South Central. My dad went to USC. He went to USA Law. So we used to go to the games. And, I lived in Palos Verdes, which is a big kind of...
Where did you do as undergrad?
LA State.
LA State. I've never even heard of that.
Yeah.
Still exists?
I think it's something else. It's a Cal State now. I forgot. But my dad, Southern California guy. I mean...
Sports?
No. My dad was super smart. He just he graduated high school at like 16. And then he went to college and went to LA State, which is down the road from where he lived, and just went and then graduated and then went to law school and worked and was just fucking razor smart. And was, practicing attorney for over 55 years and did gnarly criminal murder one stuff, same stuff my brother does. So, I always joke, dude, there's like 5 lawyers in Southern California that do that because it's not a job not a lot of people are geared up for. My dad was one, and then my brother does the same thing. So when my dad passed away, my brother had his cell phone, and he'd get a phone call from somebody that, hey, I want to come in on a, and potentially hire you. And then he would hang up, and then my dad's phone would ring. He'd pick up, and it was the same guy because there's only like 5 dudes that do that. And when my dad passed away, they were missing one. So,
well, it pays to be smart.
Yeah.
And if you're not smart, it pays to be hard.
Yeah. Yeah. That was Dave Brewer, one of our good friends. You said, if you're going to be dumb, you better be hard.
The truth.
Yeah. Did you figure that in the SEAL teams?
There were some, let's set the record straight. One, you have to have a certain level of intellect to get into the special operations community. So to score on the ASVAB, what they found is that increasing, points of intelligence on that metrics didn't necessarily equate to performance, but there were very smart dudes that lacked situational awareness. There were just hard dudes that weren't that smart that could prioritize, if they hopefully weren't overly aggressive, make decisive good decisions on the battlefield and just keep things simple.
I try to explain this to my daughter at least once a week. She has this theory that if you're smart, everything's just easy, and you're smart because it's easy. And same with sports. If I was meant to be good at basketball, I could just pick up a basketball and be good at it. And I want to fall out of my seat every time she says this. And I keep telling her the smartest people are the ones that figure out pretty early how to work hard. And that work hard is the cheat code for everything. Smart, being good. Oh, that guy's a really good athlete. No, he's just been working hard. And all these people, she's like, well, I sit in class and these people seem like it's easy. I'm like, you don't think they have tutors? You don't think somebody's helping them and they're just showing up and this is the product of it? She's a good basketball player and she's like, oh, so-and-so played better than me. I'm like, so-and-so practices every single day. I have to chase you out of the house to shoot baskets. So now our deal is we come home, we get right out of the car and she has to shoot 20 baskets.
Yeah. There you go.
And I think we fail at the margins of our experience, which is a famous Greg Glassman quote, which I believe for all his contributions and craziness, that statement that he made to me, we fail at the margins of our experience, has been such an interesting thing that I've seen come true. And I was very fortunate where we lived on the corner, and where the bus dropped us off, we would all get off the bus, and like all the kids would walk across the street, and they would all go home. But our house was the very first stop, and we had a basketball court, like not a court, but a hoop on the back of our driveway, on the garage. And so we had a basketball, and sometimes there'd be 3 people, sometimes there'd be 30, and we would play 1-on-1 basketball, 3-on-3, 6-on-6, whatever we had to play in our driveway. And we played every day when we came home. So we shot baskets and we played. And then over the years, just like certain people didn't show up anymore and certain people played, and we just ended up having this like ongoing basketball game for years. And then my brothers would come home and then they would play, and it just evolved. And that's how we got good at sports. And if we didn't have a basketball, we played, Smear the Queer. We did anything, all the games we played. Can't
say that anymore. We were talking about that the other day.
We still play it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
that was a rough game.
Yeah.
It was fun. It got brutal. Parents now would cringe probably watching current kids play that sport, but we played that all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I haven't even heard of like kick the can, if kids play kick the can, or if that's been lost.
Well, so I hate being the, I remember, curmudgeon like that. But, and it's funny, my brother and I talked about this the other day. He's like, dude, can you imagine when we were kids, if the TV had available what it has today? He's like, look at Netflix and all these other things. He's like, we would have never left the house. He's like, the reason we went outside was because there was nothing on TV. You turned it on hoping it'd be like
12 channels, ABC, NBC.
There were like 5 channels, and one of them was always MASH. And I've like seen more MASH than I ever wanted to see. And like we'd turn it on, and like if there was a show, we'd watch it, and then you go outside. And the other thing too is I think we're too nice to our kids. My mom used to yell at us and make us help and fucking just chase us around and fucking angrily yell at us for making mess.
Parents could hit kids back then. And I'm not in a overly aggressive way, but the back of the hand to the
my mom would hit us with anything, like Hot Wheels tracks and hangers, and throw shoes at us, and because we were assholes. And but today, I am so sorry that the kids have to grow up with the entire world in their hand. Like I was on a podcast yesterday, and I was telling the guy the story about in middle school. I was always a real fast runner, and then I grew a bunch and I wasn't fast anymore. And I went to the library, rode my bike, and checked out books on speed, and was trying to like figure this thing out. And
the library, has to
Dewey Decimal System. Like went in and had to checked out a book, and it showed like drawings of downhill running. So I rode around the neighborhood looking for a slight incline to run down. And so I'm like telling the story, and the guy's like, "That's like, can you imagine that today?" I'm like, "No, like." There was really like who are you going to call? Like I talked to my PE teacher, and she's like, oh, when you get to high school and you start lifting weights, it'll fix itself. I'm like, what about now? She's like, I don't know what to tell you.
And how crucially, I don't know if you guys biked everywhere. We biked everywhere.
Yeah.
And get on the rotary phone. Hey, let's all meet at the Stanford Mall, and it was a good 5 miles. But
have you seen when you go into Power Athlete, on top of the lockers is my original bike that I got when I was 6.
No kidding.
Yeah. My original Redline that I got when I was a kid, that I rode forever until I got a mountain bike when I was in like high school.
And do you know how many times I went over the handlebar, or just I was trying to have something in one hand where your knee would hit and I would go down, mess myself up on the bicycle. But we biked everywhere. Even when we went egging or TPing, we were on bikes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like, if I had one wish, it would be able to somehow like have a time machine to take my kids back to the 80s. Like that's where I'd want them to grow up. I just think it was such an easier time.
It was fun.
It was fun. Well, and here was another interesting one. My brother and I, a couple of years ago, we were sitting at home and we were telling stories, and my mom was just like flabbergasted. She's like, where the fuck was I when you guys were doing all this stuff? She's like, was I not paying attention as a parent? And we were like, I don't know. We just never came in and asked for permission. And so I think I did a little research on this. I think it was 1984 where there was the movie about the kid that got kidnapped. And then all of a sudden there was like the milk carton, remember, like the, the missing kid. So before that, it was actually in the mid 80s that I think there was like a TV show or a made for TV movie about a kid who got abducted, and it was in 84. And that started this entire thing where all of a sudden parents started wondering where their kids were and keeping a closer eye. And then you had play dates. It wasn't just like we'd come home, we'd get on our bikes and ride around the neighborhood and we'd find out where all the other bikes were. And then you just go in, knock on the door, and then that's where we were. We interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Let me introduce you to our Holistic Athlete Movement Readiness Program, also known as HAMMER. Created after working extensively with Naval Special Warfare, the U.S. Army, Marines, and first responders. HAMMER is battle-tested training sharpened at the highest level, delivering when it counts. If you're a warfighter, door kicker, or first responder, head to powerathletehq.com/hammer and claim your 7-day free trial today. Now back to the show.
So I remember, it's funny you bring that up. One, I remember for like 5 summers straight, there was a public pool. I think it was called the Dara in Portola Valley. We were there every single day of the summer, like just swimming. And I mean, the entire day, just wrecking havoc. But
did you bring water?
No,
because my kids can't go anywhere without water bottles. Like we have to like make sure everybody has a full water bottle leaving, snacks, the whole thing. I'm like, I remember my mom came, not to get you off, but I remember my mom came home with bottled water before, and I was like, what is that water in the fridge? Why is there water in the fridge? We just thought it came from the tap or the hose. Okay, so you're at the pool.
Well, I just remember that so vividly, and I actually appreciate the fact that we were out of the house and we were swimming the entire day out. It was fun, but we were walking. Had a baby girl, 9 pounds 1 ounce last.
It's a big turkey.
I know last week, and we were walking. Last night, we just put her in the not the stroller, but one of the layout things. I don't know what they're called. Jesus, bad dad.
With wheels.
With wheels.
Like a bassinet on wheels.
Bassinet, thank you. And so, I've got my pistol on me, and I looked at Jordan, and I'm like, I'm just so tense, given the world, and I'm like, it wasn't this way when we grew up.
Yeah.
And she's like, I don't know what happened. She's like, I mean, kids were being abducted back when we were, but not at the rate that they're abducted now, or
you know what, there was
or it just wasn't tracked as closely. So
there's an old clip that we can probably I don't recommend anybody look for this on YouTube, but back in the 80s, I think it was in the 80s or the 90s, there was a deal in Long Beach where they found a container that was full of like thousands of like baby parts and like basically like dismembered babies, and they had this huge container. They didn't have a Ladle bill, and it was heavy, so they couldn't load it. So they basically opened it to unload it, and like it was on the news, and it was full of baby parts. And this guy was like in tears. He was like, I've never seen anything. Like guys were throwing up. It was this huge thing, and like they couldn't figure out like why these were here and why like this whole deal. So, and that was in the 80s, and I remember that was on the news. And recently I went and found it, and there was a clip about it, and I was like, so the reason I brought it up is my brother and I talked about it. And he's like, hey, you remember that when like, because that was kind of one of our joke that like, we're going to give you baby, I don't know why, like stupid kid jokes. But I looked it up and I sent it to him, and he's like, fuck, dude, I thought we were imagining that happened. And that was on the news, and like the newscasters, and it was like all the longshoremen down in Long Beach. So I think that humanity has always been pretty dark. I just don't think that I think we were heavily insulated from it. Like I remember my dad would get up on Sunday mornings and he would read the LA Times cover to cover. And then he would sit down at Sunday dinner, and we'd have to sit there while he basically explained to us everything that was happening in the world. We'd get like Time magazine. The news was obviously, 1 or 2 channels, and it was always like weather and other stupid, the traffic report. But I remember like Time magazine and some of these other things, but like I don't remember the news cycle being pushed at us as much.
No.
This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market. We've built an online training business by partnering with Train Heroic to deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Hammer, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training. And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best training tech in the business, head to trainheroic.com/powerathletehq. And now back to the show.
And again, that goes to the access to information, but I mean, also the decline of the justice system and holding people accountable. I go very conservative on that approach. If you break a law, if you steal, you go away. It's just the bottom line. You either incentivize behaviors or you disincentivize them. And
so my dad was a criminal defense attorney for over 55 years in Southern California. And he talked about in the late 60s, early 70s, like my dad was a PO too when he was going through law school, and knew Mookie Williams, pretty famous Crip. And he told me in LA and actually in Southern California and California in general, in the late 60s, early 70s, they were talking about getting rid of prisons. So they were so underpopulated that they were talking about like different crimes and basically disbanding and getting rid of the prison system. Richard Nixon comes in and declares the war on drugs. All of a sudden, like all of these drugs, he's like, it was the single greatest thing. He goes, I wish I had stock and bought and owned one of these prison companies.
Yeah, yes.
He goes, they were almost out of business. Richard Nixon changes the war on drugs. Now all of a sudden the, black fathers are taken out of the homes, right? And, now all of a sudden you're getting caught with an ounce of weed. You're going to jail for, anywhere from 7 to 20 years. All of a sudden black fathers are out of the home. And now from that came the rise of all the gangs. And you see like all of that happened, and then that hits. And then to hear him tell the story, and fuck, I wish he was here. I mean, he's passed away in 2017. I wish he was here to tell it. But he says he goes, I went to work. I had a case in Inglewood, and he went to work in Inglewood, Inglewood Courthouse. And he goes, Inglewood was like a middle-class white neighborhood. He goes, all of a sudden I go to Inglewood one week, and then the next week I went back and there had been like 28 murders. And all of a sudden the place was like on fire because it wasn't like that. And they were like, hey, there's this new drug that hit the street, crack. And he goes, I remember the day that crack cocaine hit the street. It was like a dark cloud that came over LA. And I was like, Dad, where'd it come from? And he's like, never saw any gangbangers fly to Colombia. And he goes, all of a sudden somebody just provided these guys, and he goes, and the warehouse and cocaine, and he went through the whole thing. So, he goes, and then that was literally once they had their currency, black fathers weren't in the home, the kids were banding it together. And he goes, now all of a sudden, go watch the movie Colors if you want to see it. You remember that with Emilio? Who was that, with Emilio Estevez? No, and, Robert Duvall.
Robert Duvall.
No, it wasn't Emilio Estevez. It was
Sean Penn.
Sean Penn. Yeah, but I mean that was the eruption, and he goes, and LA was never the same.
The cartels would not be. We've been passive with the cartels. Totally passive. I mean, we're just trying to curb the flow in rather than going on the offensive and just. The United States could bring the herd on cartels and really mix up. I mean, the amount of chaos you would cause in Mexico and South America would be insane. So it's basically, what's the greater of two evils? Yeah.
Well, here's another issue. All of the drugs wouldn't be coming here unless they were being.
There's a demand
for it.
Yeah. God bless.
So, the cartels don't sell the drugs in Mexico. Like, why is it that the U.S. is so dependent upon all these illicit drugs? I mean, like it's crazy to me. Like as I talked to my brother about this too. He's like, you have to remember the reason the cartels are as rich as they are in their own business is because there's Americans willing to buy the drugs that come. He goes, if everybody just stopped buying the drugs, he goes, these cartels wouldn't exist. This is our problem that we're complaining about. These are out of borders fentanyl. The reason it's coming through is because people are buying it and people want it.
I remember is when I first moved here, I was still, sadly, I just got off active duty and with a good buddy who was also on the East Coast SEAL team I was, and we made friends with a guy who's just extremely wealthy.
Here in Austin.
And we were going out that night to the bar, and it took 2 hours for them to drive around to find their Coke.
Wow.
And I was getting increasingly pissed off sitting in the back. It was such a waste of time, but like these guys could not operate. They could not like proceed with the night unless they found cocaine. And that was the last time I ever went out with them. I'm like, it was just, I was so irate. And you have to step back and you're like, you guys just can't carry on with it. Go have a Jack Daniels. Yeah. Go have some whiskey. But they were just adamant about finding Coke that night, and I wanted nothing to do with it. I've never done that. No, never done any of that shit.
It's a weird deal, and it's a problem that we're making for ourselves. And I mean, we lost the war on drugs, like 99 to to zero every year. We lose. And, they figured maybe legalizing it would potentially help the problem. But then if you look what the legalization of marijuana has done to California and Colorado and these other places, it's not. I mean, it's not positive.
And I hope Texas, if everyone knows we both live in the Austin area.
Well,
I hope Texas.
Don't they have medical marijuana here?
They do. But I hope they never just full on legalize it for use, because Denver is a different place. If you've been to Denver in the last 3 years,
I haven't.
Talked to a cop over there. He's like, yeah. And what he said was marijuana was also a gateway drug to, let's say, more eccentric drugs, and that they'd had a higher death toll in overdoses, which they correlate to initial marijuana use.
If you talk to people, they're like, no, there's plenty of people that only smoke weed, which I believe there are. But also, I'll revert back to my brother and my dad, who this is what they do. They work with these individuals. My brother made a good point where he had a pretty high profile case where a kid was a #1 draft pick in baseball, came back and ended up freaking out and killing I think it was the dad and the TV repairman with a baseball bat. Pretty famous deal. The guy was from, I think, Marietta. And my brother represented him, and they brought in a clinical psychologist who, through testing, showed that this kid had smoked a really pretty fucking high amount of weed when he was about 12, 13, 14 years old, affected his brain in such a way where he had these psychotic episodes and ended up, killing these people with a baseball bat. And so, at a certain age, I mean, if you're like Joe Rogan and you start smoking weed when you're 30, everything's great. But all of a sudden kids who are, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
Post-development, major development of the brain.
Yeah, their brains are developing. It's causing problems. But the other one my brother brought up is he goes, I've never had a client who got busted and was involved in some heavy drug thing, whether it be either, a murder or this, I mean, any, violent crime associated with drugs, that when I talked to them, how'd you get into this? The first thing they always talk about was marijuana. Oh, I smoked weed at this point. Like, nobody jumps into heroin. Nobody decides, hey, one day I'm going to snort coke or this. Every one of them's like, I smoked weed. And then I moved on. Now, there's plenty of people that only smoke weed, and it never moves on. So you can't say it's an absolute, but every person that, went a lot farther in this deal, marijuana was really the first way station in it.
Tragic.
Yeah. I mean, it's, if you go to Amsterdam and you go to some of these, countries where it's legalized, it's not glorified the way that it is here. It's in specific parts. You go to a cafe to drink coffee, you go to a coffee shop for weed, and and it's kind of in the place and it's considered something, but it's not like it's only in certain parts, and it's not necessarily looked upon very favorably. Like, it's not like celebrated in such a way where all of a sudden, Justin Bieber has his own brand of marijuana, and it's just not.
I didn't know that.
No, I'm just saying. Okay. I think what was it, like Snoop's brand is like cookies.
That makes sense.
Yeah, which I get.
It goes to show Americans just take things to excess.
Yeah,
that's
Leaf by Snoop, and then I want to say, is it Justin Bieber that has his? I think it's Bieber has his own. Yeah, Peaches is his limited edition Peaches. So yeah.
Capitalism. That's all it is. Capitalism.
Yeah, I mean,
good on them.
People want it, but it's also been glorified. I mean, you see, rap videos and music videos and heavy metal videos. I mean, drugs are part of the culture, and but it's a sad realization.
I used to have nightmares when I was in the military that I had taken a drug and somehow had gotten caught, and I would wake up and just be like, oh, thank God that was a dream. But that was my biggest fear, of testing positive for drugs, and never did I do it. But it was just, I don't know why I would have that recurring dream. I had the same one about college. After I graduated college, something happened my last semester where they recognized that I didn't have enough credits and I wasn't going to graduate. Had that recurring dream more times than I can remember.
The dream that I had more than often was that I show up to take a final for a class that I had only been to once. That, like, I went on the first day, and all of a sudden, you just have to do work, and so you kind of do little things, and you show up, and there's like a surprise final. Like, I had that one happen to me. But for the most part, those dreams have kind of abated. As much as I love shooting the shit with you.
Yes.
And, my partner in this Everyday Warrior Sports Illustrated thing. And but what I do want to ask you a lot of questions on, I had Ben Crookston on, we were talking about, as you met Ben, like kind of the mindset of the entrepreneur and the CEO and some of that. I wanted to talk to you about leadership. Not to feel that every single person who's ever worn a uniform understands leadership, but, you as an officer, as a SEAL and all the, different work you did, especially working on different sides of the house and different teams, I think you have an interesting perspective on leadership and, more importantly, what it takes to be successful where people are depending on you, whether it be in business or, in some hostile environment. So I want to hit you with a few questions.
Send it.
All right. So, number one, what leadership qualities do you believe are most important in high stress situations?
Let me take this in a different direction. You ever seen the Simon Sinek thing? You see, I went to a certain SEAL command and asked who makes it through and how they judge them. And it uses this matrix of trust versus performance. And basically that, somebody who's high performance, low trust, they'd rather take somebody who's average performance and high trust. And while that's very like business gimmicky and business leaders like they grab onto that, that was not the primary factor in assessment and selection. It just wasn't. He commercialized it and he did a very good job of it.
Yeah.
Kudos to him. But what I saw, having started from the Marine Corps, then going to the SEALs and then being able to serve at JSOC is, one, serving at JSOC was like a PhD in just watching world-class leaders. I'm not saying I was one, but just doing an understudy under them. But high stress situations.
Well, I mean, that's kind of an interesting piece because, I mean, I always think if you wanted to go take over a nation and you needed to do it quickly and just fucking literally put boots to asses, you send the Marines.
Oh, without it,
right?
You either send the Marines or you send the 75th Ranger Regiment.
Yeah, no, I'm sending the Marines.
Yeah.
And do you know why? Because every time I meet a Marine, it doesn't matter if they're an 18-year-old kid who just got out of the Marines or a 75-year-old dude that was a Marine when he was 18, they still identify as a Marine. And like, I'll meet like older dudes that still have the high and tight and they still identify as Marines. And the thing which is universal about Marines is
pride. A huge sense of pride.
And it's like that in no other branch of the military.
It's funny you say that because Jordan's like, hey, sing to her. And I'm like, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we fight our... that's the only song I know.
Yeah.
And proudly. The Marine Corps... So I'll say this. The military is like a huge leadership incubator. I wish more of our young men and women would go into the military.
Do you think we should have mandatory service? At least 2 years?
You look at nations like Israel where they proudly all serve.
Yeah.
It does create this unifying bond.
Yeah.
And they have lower PTSD rates amongst their general populace.
Yeah.
And you look at World War II because so many people went and served. I think there was probably public pressure of get back to work. And those studies were not as vast. The PTSD rates amongst World War II veterans were much lower than the global war and terror veterans.
Was it because they didn't call it PTSD? They called it shell shock?
They called it shell shock and a number of other things.
Yeah. So my grandfather's brother, they fought in World War I. And he, obviously from England. So they were in, obviously in, the Eastern Front, somewhere in Germany. And he and another, I forgot if the guy was Dutch or what like the story goes, but they got separated and they hid in basically a farmhouse, under the boards for 2 or 3 months. After, just like the
until
crazy
the Americans,
until they could go.
Canadians arrived,
because when we watched Inglourious Bastards, my mom was telling us the story, and they had been mustard gassed and this, and so then I think I know what it was. He was from the UK, and the other guy he was with was Canadian. So then he went back to Canada, and so this is my grandfather's brother, Uncle George, is what my mom called him. He was. Basically for once he got to Canada where my grandfather was and they got there, he just basically hung out in a rocking chair with a blanket on. and they didn't matter if it was 100 degrees or negative 40. He had a fire burning. He would sit in front of it and just rock, and they would just bring him blankets. And he basically like shell shock or whatever they called it. And he just, my dad,
the same.
My dad would sit and talk to him, and he was super sharp. He just had a problem where he was cold all the time. It didn't matter if it was 100 degrees and he had 3 blankets. He could never get warm, and it was this like constant thing. And he was like that for the rest of his life. And he just, my grandfather took care of his uncle or his brother. And it was just, and he talked about like the war to end all wars and this, and like they were in these, these trenches and the water and the ice and the cold and the mustard gas and people dying. I mean, just like it never left him.
Pure carnage.
Yeah.
At a level that I've never seen. And
nobody will ever see you.
I think it does go to your question of people have the ability to deal with high stress situations differently and compartmentalize differently. But if you're asking me what qualities in a high stress situation are truly important, it's, if you want to call it emotional intelligence or emotional regulation, that was primarily the thing I saw about those who operated well during volatility, uncertainty, chaos, and ambiguity. And I think that really is what they were looking for at the tier 1 level, and also the ability to make decisions with limited information for which no book solutions existed, and to also know what information was relevant and what information wasn't relevant. But I had the opportunity to sit down with General Jerry Boykin, who was one of the early founding members of Delta Force. He was in Operation Eagle Claw, which is one hell of a story. Unsuccessful, but really due to a lot of factors outside of their control, from weather to maintenance and logistics. But he said, particularly talking about the walk, which I did not have the opportunity to go see. But, one of the special forces groups would call and say, hey, we're sending our top soldier out to screen. And he said they'd be gone in 3 days because the way the process is run, and again, I'm speaking with limited knowledge, but all the guys I know from there, is that there is a lack of information. Simply like, hey, guys, tomorrow, 4:30 a.m., be at this area with a rucksack with 50 pounds. We're going to weigh the rucksacks. Please don't try to, to play that game. Would line them up at 4:30 and say, okay, guys, start running. And a lot of guys that were used to structure and can't operate without structure, or put structure in place where there's a lack of it, would be like, well, what's the distance? What's the time limit? And they would say, just keep running. We'll let you guys know. And some guys would just completely collapse under that lack of structure and ambiguity. So that emotional regulation and the ability to just prioritize things, to assess what information you have and just decisively act, really was key to the guys who performed when the shit hit the fan. But I mean, you saw some dudes who just, lost their composure under bad situations, where guys would look at them and just sort of say, hey, like, shut up right now. Like, calm the hell down. And they just didn't operate well. Maybe they were great in training, but when reality, hit the pavement, they just could not regulate their emotions. They couldn't calm down. And I mean, there were guys out there that in the thick of it, I would watch, and they were just calm, and calm is collective because you feed off that calmness. Yeah. And when you watch these seasoned, master chiefs or senior chiefs just not phased, just simply assess the situation, assess what information they have. And sometimes you only have 40% of the information picture, and you've got to act. And they do it with decisiveness, not knowing whether it's the right call or not, but they can adjust it on the way. Yeah. That was powerful. And I mean, it goes to 777 wouldn't have happened without my time there. And watching how these guys deal with problem sets. And that's all that mission is dealing with asymmetric problems that nobody has dealt with before. And you've got to show innovativeness. You've got to be resourceful. And yeah, I was taken back, and really in a lot of ways went off the flow of other guys and just how they would react in really bad situations. And if they were calm, I was calm. And there was times I had to step up and well, they're far and few between. But at the regular SEAL teams, there was a lot of times I'd had to step up where guys were losing their composure, or the group think was starting to weigh in, and guys were starting to, collectively, think that something was the right decision when you knew it wasn't. You're like, hey, no, we're going left. I know you all want to go right. I hear you. We're going left. Get it done. But I would say emotional regulation and the ability to deal with lack of information, again, in those ambiguous situations, and just simply put structure in place rapidly and just continue to be agile and innovate or iterate with the problem set, because there's no right answer with a lot of the challenges that we faced.
Did you find a situation where certain guys, when you get into stressful situations, become more calm and others start to kind of elevate a little bit? I did hear from some of the guys that one of the things they looked for was when the bullets started flying, there were certain guys that, their heart rates fell, everything got real calm once the stress went up, and there were other guys that just couldn't handle the stress. And so they liked guys that like very cool, calm, and collected when the bullets. But the thing they always joked about, or at least the guys that we worked with made a joke, they were like, yeah, the only problem in life is they're going to need somebody shooting bullets at them for the next 30 years for them to be able to function.
So it is a drug. It does become a drug. It almost like Sunday. You just, I'm sure you felt differently on Sunday, especially when you ran out of that tunnel. It was just
nice.
Like
for you guys, it's the coolest job you're ever going to get to do in this world. And then all of a sudden you don't get to do it anymore. And you're like, what a sad day.
And that's where the parallel I've found talking to a lot of pro athletes like yourself, they're like, when it's gone, it's just like, how do I replace it? And the answer is you don't.
No,
you don't.
And then you realize the coolest thing you did in your life was in your 20s and 30s. And then you got to live for the rest of your life knowing that nothing you'll ever do will ever be as cool as what you just did.
Now I'm changing diapers. And that's, hey, I'm proud to do it.
I was thinking about you today when you said that you had to go to a baby checkup. And I remember like, this always tripped me out. I remember, when we had our girls, like we were in the hospital, and then all of a sudden you like go to leave. And they like go out to the car and they like check the car seats and they put the babies in there and everything. And then you get in the car and they're like, bye. And I remember thinking like, they're going to let us leave with these things? We're totally not prepared for this.
And if you're like me, I don't like dealing with delicate things. I'm like, but to your point about the heartbeat or heart variation, there are assessment and selection programs that utilize the heart rate monitors while putting the candidates through scenarios to see who's off the charts and who only moves up maybe like 5 to 10 heartbeats from their baseline. And it is telling as to who can deal with that stress, because the guy who's just off the charts will only be able to take that for so long before he just loses total effectiveness.
Sure.
He's just expending more bandwidth to deal with those situations. And so, the assessment and selection programs have become, and I've been retired for 6 years, become better and better because they bring in the human performance piece. Mm-hmm. They bring in the psychological piece. They have psychologists out there assessing people, running them through scenarios or tests, and it's really become a complex system. They know what they're looking for, and I'm sure that changes as different generations come in. But was wildly impressed with the system, and actually, in all fairness, the Army Special Forces community really led the way with that, first based off attributes. And they created this, what they call the whole man concept, which goes back to Greek philosophy of what are the attributes that we're looking for that make a really good Green Beret. Mm-hmm. And so let's design the process around those attributes so we can actually assess on those attributes rather than saying, hey, run them through a series of very hard mentally and physically tests, and whoever makes it out the back end is a Green Beret.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there might have been a philosophy in that, like we want the hardest dudes, but if they just need hard people, they just stuff them in the Marines.
Sometimes that's the right answer.
Yeah. You just need like a really hard, like 18-year-old kid that'll just like point in direction, break glass in time of war.
You look at the Raiders and the UDTs and even the SEALs and SF guys of Vietnam, they were just hard dudes.
Yeah.
They were just hard dudes. Some of them almost criminal in nature. Yeah. I joked with Doc about that, Doc Parsley.
My dad's cousin was a UDT in Vietnam. And he was a surfer. He got drafted.
Yeah. Yes, Southern California.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they brought their surfboards, and they would paddle out and set ordnance on the, Viet Cong, like NBC, whatever. They would basically set ordnance and then paddle in and then catch waves in the dark surfing in. And they would wear like, you know, board shorts and like, I mean, he was a terrible alcoholic too, which I feel awful about. But that's all they did. He's like, dude, he goes, basically they would just surf, and he goes, they would paddle out in this, and they just basically drafted a bunch of surfer kids, and they're like, oh, you're a surfer? UDT. And he was, I never saw him where he didn't wear a Hawaiian shirt and have a drink in his hand. And he died of alcoholism, but he would tell us some amazing stories. Yeah, Little Bill.
Which is a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys drink heavily when you're on your off time. Alcohol is just part of the culture.
It's the grease. It's how you grease the machine. Yeah. It's how you grease the groove, you know, like, so when I was a young NFL player, when we get on the plane after games, they would hand you, sandwiches and 2 beers. And then the trainers or the doctors would come by, and they would put painkillers in these little white kind of, cardboard boxes, and they would shake them, and they sounded like rattlesnakes. So they would come by and they would shake, and there were certain guys who liked painkillers, and there were those dudes that drink beers. And so dudes would be like, get painkillers, make I'll trade you beers for painkillers. And so this was a pretty
black market.
This was a pretty common occurrence. And for me, having a painkiller and a drink is like just like a ninja blow dart. It's like, it's not good. Like, I'll just fall asleep. So I would always crack a beer. I would try to avoid the painkiller. And there were other guys that's what they did. And then what happened was either some players got in trouble driving home, or 2 coaches, I think, got into a fist fight in first class. They were, because the coaches would drink too. They got shit-faced.
Private plane though, right?
Yeah, private plane. So like the coaches would always sit in first with someone like the, you know, like the fucking Aaron Rodgers, you know, quarterbacks would sit in, and we'd always just sit in fucking back where we'd have a big row to stretch out and sit back there, and dudes would gamble and play different things. Well, I think one of the games guys were playing a high stakes game of, no, it was craps, and a big fight broke out because guys were shit faced. And then some coaches got into a fist fight. I think it might've been a Raiders coaches. I can't remember who it is. And then they just banned alcohol on the planes. Then dudes were just bringing in bottles in their bags, and then at that point they were like, you know, no alcohol on planes. And then all of a sudden, you know, when you know, that's, well, do you remember the story about Brett Favre, where he was basically taking like somewhere between 30 and 40 Vikes a day? And
how is that even possible?
I have no fucking idea. Well,
the guy's liver, his liver is still intact. I know he recently came down with Parkinson's.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's less about the hits and more about the opiates.
No kidding.
Yeah, I mean,
is there any correlation?
Yes, 100%
between Parkinson's and
well, we'll think about it. The receptors in the gut are the same ones in the brain, and that if you were to take nothing but opiates and destroy the lining of the stomach, the blood-brain barrier, all that. I mean, like these things are not compartmentalized. What happens in the gut happens in the brain. But the story goes that they were at and I heard this from a player, they were at like a team dinner thing, and he was going around bumming painkillers off of guys, and he got a big thing and gulped it down, sat there and vomited them up, and then proceeded to like pick the ones out of the vomit and put them back in. That's how you know you got a problem. So,
but man, was it a pleasure to watch Brett Favre play, man?
Well, there's a pretty good game in Green Bay where Aaron Rodgers got lit up pretty well, and then they interviewed him after the game. They stopped doing that because he was so looped. And I mean, that was just part of the deal. Like when I broke my leg, they gave me a bunch of painkillers to play. And then I was sitting on the bench just kind of like blowing spit bubbles. And the doc's like, "You all right?" I'm like, "No, I'm really tired. I can't play." He's like, "Oh, take this." And they prescribed me Ritalin. He's like, "Hey, you've seasonal depression. I'm going to give you one of these." And he gave me one of those. And like all of a sudden I was like, wow, Ritalin and painkiller? Like my hands feel like perfect. I'm going to use these things as fucking
so the movie
battering
with Al
rams.
Pacino's not far off. What was it? What was it? Great movie.
Yeah. You know, like, dude, his talk, his
classic,
his pregame speech where he's like, "Inches, they're everywhere," and he does that whole. That might be one of the greatest pregame speeches that I've ever heard, and I heard a bunch of them, and that's still one of the best. But pretty accurate. So the NFL was real fast and loose. They were like, guys were getting Toradol shots, and they were, you know, handling out painkillers on the plane. Like, "Oh, you dinged up." So they had to really tighten stuff up. Like once, you know, the concussion thing started and that thing with Brett Favre, I mean, you know, they really had, like, they were playing it real fast and loose, and they've tightened it up. It's a lot different today than it was 20 plus years ago. I played right on like when I was a rookie was kind of the tail end of like the Wild West. And then you saw that kind of Wild West end. And then when the CBA and the strike happened in 2009, after that, everything changed pretty dramatically.
The two most dominant football films for me were, again, I can't remember the name of it.
Any Given Sunday.
Any Given Sunday. And then was it The Program?
Yeah.
About, I think it was Florida State, or was the Florida State Colors?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Vladimir.
Any Given Sunday came out my rookie year, and I got hurt. So I was on IR. My mom and dad were in town, and so was my girlfriend at the time. And the movie was getting a ton of press and everything. And I'm like, let's go see the movie. So we're watching it, and they're like looking over at me, and I'm like, this is how the NFL is. Like, I don't know what fucking team this is, but I want to play on it. They're like cutting a car in half, and there's strippers and hookers at practice. I mean, there's like this dude. I mean, I like looked at it and was like, and they were like mad at me that this is somehow what's been happening at work, and I haven't been telling them. And I'm like, fuck, dude, if this is a team that I can play on, find me this fucking team.
Calling your agent.
Oh my God. But so that was good. The Program one was pretty wild. I mean, do you remember the scene where they went out and they were laying in traffic?
Yes.
And then those kids tried to go do it, and they all got hit and died and shit, and they cut that out of the movie.
For all the negativity or the negative things that come out of those films, do you know how many kids you invigorated to want to make it to the next level?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing with SEAL movies that come out, and you're like, oh, that movie
What was
sucks,
the first SEAL movie you saw?
Probably Charlie Sheen.
Oh my God.
I had no idea what the SEALs were until
Navy SEALs with Charlie Sheen was probably one of the best representation I've ever seen of the SEAL teams, hands down. Now, knowing the SEALs, I didn't grow up, but now that I know the SEALs as long as I have, that movie was an accurate representation.
I don't know. I was wildly impressed, man. I mean, characters, big personalities. You got to be same with pro sports. You're dealing with a lot of A-type personalities. You don't have to like everyone. You have to love everyone.
Yeah.
But
well, the one thing the NFL teaches you is, and I've tried to explain this to everybody I've worked with, especially even guys today. I played with guys that I did not like personally. Of course. If they were on the side of the road and their car was broke down and they were on fire, I would probably drive by and fucking throw gasoline on it. Like, I just didn't care for them as people. But we were there to do a job. And as long as we had a working relationship where we understood, like, hey, this is what we're collectively trying to do for this mission, or not this mission, but to execute this game or this play or whatever it is. Like, as long as we have a symbiotic relationship that we're all going in the right direction to win, I can deal with you. And I run into this even in business today, where like, oh, I don't like so-and-so. And I'm like, yeah,
okay,
but
be a professional.
Oh my, I deal with this. This is something that, trying to explain it to him. Like, well, this guy's got a good skill set that we need, and he fits within it. Well, I don't want to work with him because I don't like him. And I'm like, this doesn't,
this isn't a family.
No.
This is a high performing team. And I often talk about one being a professional, and what that comes down to is like versus love. People are like, oh, you must have liked all the SEALs you served with. No. And you know what? Not all of them like me. Yeah. And we're fine with that. But I had no doubt that even, one of my counterparts who he and I did not get along.
Yeah.
And
I know as soon as his podcast comes out, he's going to text me.
Great. And I hope he's doing well. I genuinely do. I did love him. I had no doubt that if I was wounded, he would leave his position of cover to come grab me and probably hit me in the gut while doing it. But I would have done the same for him, though I wouldn't have been able to lift that guy.
Yeah, he's a big
with
dude.
a dam.
Yeah, big dude.
And I've had a lot of time to reflect on that. And it's that Willie Nelson quote: "Let people be people." It's their greatest strength.
Yeah.
And if you don't like somebody, as long as your values align, as long as everyone's like north arrow is towards whatever you're trying to achieve, then that's fine.
Well, yeah. And I think certain people have how I put this, not sound too much of a dick, but certain people have the luxury of picking and choosing. I like this person, I don't. And they kind of stack the deck based upon who, I disagree with that wholeheartedly.
That's where you almost become a silo.
Yeah.
Or what they say, a vacuum, because everyone, like, groupthink comes into play. Then if you've done that and you're a leader, you've basically collected guys that are going to agree with you on everything and not dissent. And one of the things I've always talked about is, like, the one thing I noticed about the culture of special operations is there's a healthy disrespect for authority. Yeah. If done in a professional, tactful way of like, no, hey, sir, that idea is stupid and this is why, and we're not going to do that. So come up with another plan, or, hey, here's a better option. And I mean, that's your brain trust. That's the guys are your brain trust. And how could I compete with guys that had 14 deployments to my 8 deployments, even though I had the title of troop commander?
Yeah.
You just can't. And quite frankly, the system was built for where they're making a lot of the tactical decisions. I'm getting resources in play. My greatest weapon was the radio overhead. And you've seen the picture. I was one of the rare officers that used to carry the satellite radio on my person rather than having a radio man with me who wasn't a SEAL. He was a sailor who was trying to remember the rate that they would give some combat skills to. And no, I had no issue of that. And I mean, at the end of the day, did I have a say? Yes. But you used that sparingly and picked your battles where it made sense. And I didn't always pick my battles all that well. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's interesting things. I find periodically people will die on a certain sword. And like that's why for power athlete and me, I've always been, over the years, called myself a performance whore. That if performance and outcome is the intended goal, how we get there isn't necessarily all that important. I mean, I was talking about it today with somebody in terms of business, that certain people need a lot of congratulations, and they need to feel that they're the guy at the top of the mountain and the one that made all this happen and this. And I could give two shits about that. I'm like, as long as it's successful, I don't care who gets the credit. If that guy needs all the credit and we do it all, it doesn't matter as long as we win. And as long as the intended outcome is what we're going for. And I'm just amazed where people will scuttle it because they're not getting their inner child nurtured, or they need to feel this, like, I'm the one that did this. And it's to me, I mean, even to the point of like fucking everything up because you need to have it done your way so you can at the very end say that I knew what was right and what was wrong.
It's almost like a quarterback who's a little high on their horse. Like, okay, go in without an offensive line. See how you fare then. I have a concept of always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Yeah. Like, I wasn't the fastest, the strongest. I've said this before, the most tactically skilled, but there was 40 of us, and we either were going to get an L or we were going to get a W, and all I cared about was getting the W. Yeah. And other people stepped up at certain times on different missions to make things happen, to salvage the plan or to deviate from the plan based off of what was happening on the battlefield. And it really didn't matter to me. I've just been fortunate to have been part of some very high performing, successful teams. And I consider myself blessed for that. But was I ever the Brady? No.
Well, it's pretty interesting in terms of like the special operations community, because we just got done with this 20-year war on global terror where everybody was extremely operational and in these amazing situations that, had the ability to be able to make movies about. And now that we're no longer officially in the global war of terror with a botched pullout that, was, I'll say an abortion if anybody ever watched it. Now, the teams are kind of used more as like common lightning rods in these kind of specific situations. So, the one thing what's great about the, NSW and special operations community is that they're constantly striving for perfection. I just wonder if now the global kind of like SEAL community, because there is no defined global war on terror and everything's kind of very piecemealed out. Like guys went back to like certain regions and, the deal that, guys won't have as many kind of at-bats to be able to kind of work through it. I mean, there's so much historical support that they can really begin to do it. But I mean, you probably look at like, I've heard Andy talk about, the SEAL teams, before war and then at the very end, like the amount of growth over 20 years was something that would have taken hundreds of years.
Because you're in a pressure cooker the entire time. And if you want to truly grow, if you want to truly learn, you got to push outside your mental and physical comfort zones. And that's what war does. I can't speak to what special operations is doing today. I talked to some guys that are still in here and there, but I guarantee you this, and I know this, is that the second it's done, they still try to hold on to those lessons learned. They say, hey, here's the new threat. We need to get back in the water. The next war could be in the Pacific. So guys, this is what we need to train to. And you're training all the time. No different than professional sports. Yeah. So you just have a new direction. And if that doesn't turn out to be true, much like the global war on terror, where guys were preparing, I was in the Marine Corps in 98, we were preparing for the next World War III against Russia or North Korea or China, you speed up to the speed of war. The guys will I mean, they have such a breadth of experience. They're so adaptive, so agile. They'll just adjust to whatever the new fight is. And I mean, that speaks to what any business would want to become, is that they're so adaptable, that they're so resilient, that they're so, I keep using the word agile. They have zero or they don't have a fear of failure, because they understand that's part of the process to learning. And there was a lot of mistakes early in the global war on terror, talking to guys that were actually part of it. And I would just listen to the stories. And they, a lot of them would say, hey, we were really fucked up at the beginning of the war. And I'm like, dude, like, this is 2009 and I'm watching you now. Like, how's that possible? Because we had so many iterations. We learned so much that, we've become what we've become. And it was just a privilege to be a part of that. Yeah.
All right. So number 2, as an officer, how do you balance leading with being part of a team in a unit where everyone is highly skilled and trained? I feel like we just kind of hammered that number 2 as well. I mean, because you were saying that, like, as an officer, I mean, you come in and you got let's say a handful of deployments, and there's somebody there who's been at DevGru for 20 years and has, fucking tens of deployments. Like, how do you kind of balance that? Like, being able to say, hey, you know what, I'm, on paper, I'm supposed to be in charge of these guys, but these guys have so much more experience. I mean, this is what they do, and these guys have kicked doors for a number of years. I mean, how do you kind of balance that piece? So
you've heard this before. Leadership can be a very lonely position, and you've got to keep some separation between yourself and the guys. I wasn't going out with the guys all the time, or if there was parties in Virginia Beach, even though I'd be invited, I just wouldn't show up when I was dealing with my own issues at home. But even on deployment, surrounded by these guys for 4 months straight, it still sometimes was very lonely. But when you have people,
you guys aren't sitting there drinking martinis every night?
No, we weren't drinking overseas. I think
honestly, I just imagine at the end of the day, like, you guys come in and, like, all of a sudden somebody's like, and you guys are over there having, like, absolute martinis with 2 olives. Let's just imagine
there were some very eclectic dudes that were like that.
I do just imagine SEALs sitting around. I don't know why I just picture martinis, even though I've never seen a SEAL drink a martini. I've seen SEALs drink a lot of chickies in the different spots over the years.
There's a lot of whiskey. Yeah. It was like whiskey was a
lot of drinks,
drink of choice. But
I just imagine martinis, 2 olives, straight up.
Yeah,
very chilly.
I was never that guy. So when you have a scenario like that, is you tread very lightly, and I, my position was, you're just choosing the direction. Like, hey, the rudder of the ship needs to go that direction. That's what the problem set that we're dealing with, and let them determine the how. And especially at that level, I mean, you've got guys that are brighter than you. I had guys with master's degrees when I didn't have one.
Yeah.
And if you see something going awry or just efforts going down some stray path, like, hey guys, we got to, ratchet it back this way, course correct a little bit, but they determine the how. I guess I would give them the why. Not that they always agreed with the why. And I didn't have a lot of choice sometimes in what we were doing and why we were doing it. It came down from higher. But again, back to the notion of the brain trust, is that collectively, and I already said it, a lot of them are smarter than me, but collectively their intelligence far outweighs yours. They can solve any problem set faster than you can. You just have to know how to sort of focus that energy or put them in the right direction. And then the system is built with all these different planning cells, and you don't want to step on somebody who's in charge of that planning cell unless it's just not fitting with the overall collective plan. But you went through a lot of training iterations with those different planning cells to where people knew what they needed to do, how it fit into the plan. And then, I think my job at the end was to put it all together in a very nice PowerPoint, participate in the briefing of it, and then, command and control on the ground, which was not over the tactical fight whatsoever. It was basically making sure that they had the resources and the support necessary to do what they needed to do. And I was usually 200 yards away from the fight, still in harm's way. But I mean, that's why we didn't lose a lot of officers. The enlisted guys were the ones taking the casualties. But I like high performing teams. They're not easy to lead. And what I think a lot of people don't understand is with high performing teams, I've got a good friend who's a Canadian tier 1 guy. He's like, conflict is built into the system. It has to be that healthy disrespect for authority of like, hey, your plan sucks. I don't care about your rank. This is putting guys at risk or the mission at risk. And those conversations happen and sometimes they're heated. But you could see 2 guys go at it, like almost near blows. And then 5 minutes later, they're talking and everything is fine. So a lot of people can't operate in a high performing environment like that. I mean, the best analogy I have is look at The Last Dance. It destroyed what I thought of what the Chicago Bulls, this cohesive team, and they were in a lot of ways cohesive towards the mission.
Oh, do you think that The Last Dance destroyed your vision of what you imagined? Or
I think you got a very deep look at the culture and the dynamics of the team, and that if one of them messed up and it was no different from where you came or I came, like you'd be called to the mat on that.
Yeah. And when I watched The Last Dance, like I was amazed at Jordan's pettiness. Like like that blew my mind. That probably hands down the best basketball player to ever play. And, to hear him say like, hey, I didn't get to play against Jerry West and some of these other guys. But like, the fact that even LeBron is, people bring that even into the conversations
of his era.
I think Jordan's the best of any era.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And watching that,
and there's probably some bias there.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But watching that Last Dance, I was amazed at like just the level of pettiness where, what was it, like Isaiah Thomas somehow imaginary slights him and like, keeps him off of the Olympic team. I mean, just like what it goes back to, it doesn't matter how rich you are. It doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter anything. Like you can still be like Tom Brady's still petty. You don't think he's sitting in the booth watching those guys and, now he's sitting over there being like, I could fucking do it better than these people. These fucking guys suck. And so that like Jordan's level of pettiness, but I'm just amazed that they were able to be as successful as they are. But everybody realized it was Jordan's show and they just had to be role players in it. But I mean,
for a good reason. Yeah. For a good reason. Same with Tom Brady.
Yeah. When you were overseas, how did you build and maintain morale in the team, like with adversity and just on deployments? Or was it actually easier to be a SEAL on deployment because you didn't have to worry about all the other stuff like family life and home and here and training? Usually were it was just very siloed in that you were there to do your job.
I can't speak to other guys. Really 2 points before I get to the crux of that question is I can't speak for other guys, but I know when I deployed, like the first 2 days, like I would miss my 2 kids. Like just gut wrenching, like just sorrow. But there was a point, and I swear to God, it was like after 2 to 3 days, it was like, okay, I know what I need to do. I'm where I want to be. If I do it right with these guys, I'll see my kids again. And so I had to like compartmentalize my kids. And because I always stayed busy and all my work was not always effective work, I didn't call home all that much. Doesn't speak well to me. And I knew exactly what we needed to do. Second part on that is, when you talk about leadership, and there's a lot of military speakers out there, and I'm one of them. One of the first things I tell business leaders is I'm like, you can't replicate what you had in pro sports or in special operations, because those guys bled, sweat, and cried in special operations for 12 months to get into that community. So there's this massive amount of pride, and that pride drives them. Like they just hate failure, especially not during training, even though they have a distaste for it. They understand it's part of the process, but on a mission, they will do whatever to make sure that mission success is achieved. So as a leader, unlike the business world, I really don't have to drive people as much as you do in the business world, who have no organizational pride, who have no personal pride, like we did in special operations. So when military speakers talk on leadership, it's sort of flawed in that notion if you don't broach that. So business leaders have to attain a higher level of leadership, because you're dealing with sometimes not the highest common denominator. You're dealing with people that are coin operated, that just care about the money. They don't have any pride or loyalty towards their team. And that's the pinnacle of leadership. So with morale, The times I found morale tank was when you weren't doing anything. And so guys would just, you're on deployment, you go on deployment for one reason, to close with and destroy the enemy. I mean, they're commandos. They just want to hunt.
Dudes want to get it on.
Dudes want to get it on. And I know that may sound counter to what a lot of humans believe, but it's just what they're built for, what they're designed for.
It's why they signed up.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I mean, it feels like, like talking to Parsley about it. He's like, being a peacetime SEAL was really weird.
It was hard.
Like, he's like, all we did was train. And then all of a sudden, he goes, I figure like, I can't do this forever. I go into medical school and then 9/11 happens. And I was trying to like get back because I knew this was my chance. And I was already on this track. And he goes, I like, so that's why he's always, and like Doc's like, I was a peacetime SEAL. And he's like, God, I would have loved to have done that. It's all we ever talked about. And, and he goes, for the guys that didn't get to do it, that sucks.
It does. And I feel bad for like this generation of SEALs, is they came in for a reason.
Yeah.
We came in because of the Vietnam era. We wanted to do what they want to do. These guys want to do it. And who knows? They may, probably in more severe circumstances, but, and they'll rise to the occasion because of what they're doing now, which is just they're training, but training gets boring after a while. I mean, you go out to an island, California for 3 weeks, was it 2 weeks or 3 weeks? There wasn't a guy who, it was like in the desert. It sucks. You're training every day from like 6 a.m. until like midnight, or if not past midnight. And every guy at some point would be like, yeah, I think this is my last workup. I think I'm going to get out after this. And I was guilty of charge with saying that. You say, so guys will train, they'll find ways to fill the time. I remember sitting in Djibouti and the guys were playing something called smash ball every night, which I'm sure is a variation of smear the queer.
Yeah. The guys used to play speedball. Was it called speedball? Yeah,
maybe it was speedball.
Yeah, speedball. So when we were at working with the guys out of DevGru, they were playing speedball, and then dude got a dislocated shoulder, and they kind of banned it because they were just out there fucking killing each other on a field. But
boys will be boys.
Yeah,
either you give them something to do that's meaningful, or they're going to fill the time with something else. But as you talk about building trust, that just takes time. One, you usually have a year or two to train together to build that trust. And what people get wrong is, again, trust versus liking somebody. If, again, the values align or the focus towards what you're trying to achieve is aligned, a good mentor broke this down for me a year ago. And I'm like, how did I not think it? He's like, there are multiple lines of trust. So you may not trust this guy in it's the old phrase, do you trust him with your life, but not your money or your wife? So you don't trust him with your money or your wife. That's fine. But you trust him to do his job and to protect your six and your life. And the answer is yes. Then you have to deal with those other lines of trust where it may not be built there. And a lot of that comes into personalities. And I found that sort of an evolution for me of, I still hadn't grasped that at this age. Hey, this guy's personality is way different than mine. There's things I don't like about it. I don't trust him in this arena. But when it comes to the business, he's got a sense of pride, and he's going to drive, and he's going to close that sale. And so that's my problem to deal with is getting over those feelings and recognizing that there's multiple lines of trust. And if I trust him to get the mission done to the expected standard, then that's what you move forward with. Because if you're looking for the perfect team, it doesn't exist. I mean, it's. My old man says families, sometimes there's mushrooms in the closet. You don't need to air that publicly. Yeah. My wife and I still laugh about that quote, but with every high performing team, if you do a deep dive, like we did with the Chicago Bulls, the national championship, Chicago Bulls of the 90s, there are things.
World champions.
Multiple world champions. Yes. 6 times, I believe.
Seeing as though, but the world was only in America. Yeah. So it's not like but what they did play in the Olympics, they beat everybody. So there was nobody coming to beat them.
So, there's the pros and the cons with every high performing team. And I think, I wish I had a lot more maturity to understand that during my time in the military.
Yeah, not the truth, huh?
And even we talked about my counterpart who, first off, like if there's somebody I want to fight, like I'm getting behind him.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a fighter, man. Yeah. And I wish I could have dealt with things a lot differently. And that's life. But trust is I feel like
there's a lot of hubris in youth. Like when you were young, there was a lot of like puffed up chest, a lot of hubris, and then you look back on it as a little bit older, a little bit more seasoned individual, and you think, man, I didn't handle that as well as I should have.
Or you know what? I wasn't as good as I thought I was. And I'm fine with that. But like I said, damn, was I part of some pretty freaking awesome teams. That's where I draw my pride. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride.
What strategies do you use to maintain mental toughness and resilience?
Now?
Well, I mean, the ice bath is by far the one that you lean on. The ice barrel, ice bath. I mean, cold plunging is really the path to being an elite warrior.
It's everything.
Like if you want to become Genghis Khan, it starts in the ice.
What do I do? One, I'd say the military helped me. Well, my parents helped me build a pretty damn good foundation. Then the military just chiseled away at that. So without that structure of what I've been through up to this point, I don't know what that would look like. So I've got a great foundation, as you do. And, with mental toughness and resilience, the ice bath is, you and I have talked about this. It's like when somebody gets in there, they do the, you and I just get in.
No, it's, so one of my favorite things that I need to shoot the video is I have my 8-year-old son get in there. And he starts literally hyperventilating and like making all these noises. And I dude, it is hysterical. I need to film it. And then he's like, Daddy, you get in. And then I get in. And he's like, how, there's you don't make a noise, nothing. And I'm like, no, because it's not cold. And he's like, it has to be cold. And so we have this argument. And I'm like, I know it's cold, but I won't let the cold in. And at some point you'll create a suit of armor to where now life in the cold and the problem, because he always asks, we were watching an NFL game last year. He's like, Daddy, did you play in that cold weather? I'm like, yeah, in short sleeves in Green Bay in January at 7:30 at night on a Sunday night in January. And he's like, wasn't it cold? I'm like, yeah, it was freezing. My hand was crunching through the ice. Because they didn't mow the grass because we ran the ball well, so they left the grass alone. The grass was frozen.
Tactic on their side.
Yeah, it's bullshit. So we were as we were putting your hand down, your hand would crunch through the ice. And he asked me, and I'm like, yeah, but you have to create a certain amount of mental toughness and resilience to where you're able to compartmentalize and just kind of put it out of your mind to be able to do these tasks.
I think there's a cascading effect to this. The more, and the motto of Legacy Expeditions is just do hard shit.
Yeah.
The more hard shit you do, you built this almost like leather or this like lizard type skin that just makes things a lot easier. And this isn't rocket science. This is backed by psychology. But continually find ways to push yourself outside your mental and physical comfort zones, and you will continue to grow, and that mental toughness and resilience will grow. The ice bath for me, that just wakes me up, dude. That's just it's almost like a morning coffee. Yeah. It's routine. So after lunch, when you start to be lethargic, and I have the luxury of working from home, I just go get in the 39-degree water because it cools my body temp, and that's it.
Yeah.
But I would say you've got to develop a routine that constantly pushes you. If for some people it's the ice bath and that's the thing, that's great. That's work for you. That's where you're going to start. But you have to have some routine where you're constantly going outside your mental and physical comfort zones, and the things you'll learn about yourself, the problems that you thought were big aren't that big. And that emotional regulation, we know it. Emotional intelligence is just it's on the decline.
That's an interesting piece, man. You think about emotional intelligence. I always wonder if it's a superpower or a hindrance or an anchor. Like the ability, and I'll kind of paint this a little, right? Like the emotional intelligence to walk in the house and be like, is there something wrong? Is my wife mad at me? Like the emotional intelligence. And then there's the other part.
That's lack of situational awareness.
Right. Like the emotional intelligence and be like, I can feel a lot of tenseness in the air. Did I do something? And not knowing necessarily why she's mad, or the ability to be like, I just don't give a fuck. And there's kind of two pieces of that.
You're gonna give a rat's ass here shortly when she makes,
or you're gonna get divorced, and But that's a big thing with situational. Maybe it's situational awareness, emotional intelligence, but to be able to read a room and kind of understand a little bit, that's something that I've had to cultivate later in life. The lack of emotional intelligence playing in the NFL, I think, was a superpower. By not really giving a shit, coming into a meeting and seeing that somebody was having a bad day and being like, oh, the guy's having a bad day. Well, let's just fucking ride him harder then. And
well, that's high performing teams. That's blood in the water.
Yeah.
That's just the dynamic of like, oh, so-and-so's bothered by that. Everyone take a bite.
One of my favorite things, and the reason I loved training camp, was all the rookies would always come in and they'd be super excited in training camp, and they get done with like the first week of double days, and then they get into like the second week, and all of a sudden you would just see the energy falling, and it was like somebody was shooting them out of a fucking butthole, and they were just this, like you could see it on them, and I would feed off of their misery, and I'd be like, how bad do you feel? This is awful, isn't it? Your feet hurt, your hands hurt, everything hurts. Like, you just want to quit. Like, tell me how bad it is. And they'd be like, man, I didn't think it was going to be this hard. I'm like, just tell me more. And they're like, why do you want to know this stuff? I'm like, because this is my tackling fuel. This is what supercharges me. I feed off of your misery. And then I'd go out there and I'd look for these motherfuckers at practice. I'd be like, they're having a bad day. Let's go give them a worse day. And like, that was what I fed upon that. Like, I just needed to see their misery. And I know that's fucking sick, but I knew, because like training camp was just such like a beginning. It was like a opening hello handshake for football. Cause then like once you get to that point, you have 17 weeks and then the playoffs, so call it 20, 22 weeks. You have anywhere for the next 6 months, and these kids are like upset about the first 2 weeks. And like, a lot of them had no idea what was coming. And like, the fact that it was going to get hot and it was going to get cold and there was going to be injuries and wins and losses. And this whole roller coaster was starting, and they were upset that we were in double days and the food sucked. And like, it just, I still laugh about it. Like, that was the joy I needed to be like, oh, it's a lot. It's going to be a fucking lot. Fuck you. And that was sick. But I did enjoy it. Indirectly,
you're probably helping them a bit by actually making something harder.
Yeah.
You're adding to that mental toughness. You're adding to that resilience that either they're going to cope and perform at that level, or it's not for everyone. And it's powerful. I mean, it's no different from where I came. Like, if you were having a bad day, the guys were going to pile on.
Yeah.
And there was a point where,
and then what you end up doing is you end up just, even if you're having a bad day, just putting on the shiny veneer. Be like, what do you mean? Everything's great. Love to be here.
That's what you got to do.
Yeah.
You show them that it doesn't bother you.
Yeah.
And if it's actually convincing, they'll leave you alone.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you handle failure, both personally and as a leader? I know failure is inevitable in any role, but do you have like a unique perspective on how you manage setbacks and learning? Some of not everything goes as planned, but your ability to kind of stay focused on the plan and then be able to maneuver, and instead of just going like, well, I guess it didn't work. Oh, sad's me.
How do I deal with failure? Probably not well. As much as I understand it's part of the process.
Screaming and crying and stomping my feet.
Guys understand it's part of the process. It doesn't mean they have to react to it well. As long as they sort of compartmentalize and then carry on. But in the Everyday Warrior book, I talked a lot about failure and how it's not an indictment of your worth as a human being or an assessment of your character. It's not. It's just part of the process. I mean, you go back to Operation Eagle Claw, again, which was the failed hostage rescue attempt of the 52 Americans being held in Tehran. Those guys were devastated. They were pissed. But they found a way to fail forward. They dissected, and we had this process of when something would fail, even when something was successful, we would dissect it. Of why did that go successfully? What did we learn? But regardless, what could we have done better? How could we have cleared the target quicker? How could we have not had a gap in assets overhead, which was usually my fault? But I mean, we did the same thing with failures. Guys would come back, they would sit down, and they would do a hot wash on that thing to sort of continue that continuous learning process. But you try to fail as much in training during double days. You set people up to fail so that when they see that in reality, they're like, oh, no, I've been here before. I know when I went that course of direction, it was miserable. We need to actually go the opposite direction. But personally,
I disagree in the NFL because the coaches are so myopic in their way that they look at things that like any like
they think the play is going to work.
Well, like any failure is catastrophic. Like, okay, hey, I used to try to remind my offensive line coach, I'm like, those fuckers get paid too, right? Like we're doing 9-on-7 inside run drill and you're expecting to gash these fucking guys. These guys are a top ranked defense and those guys are making millions of dollars. Like we might not fucking gash them on every play. And then the coach would act like we had just fucking, failed.
Yeah.
I can't believe that we didn't, this. And you're like, or a guy gets his shoulder reach and gets swum and ends up losing on a pass pro and they fucking lose their minds. And you're like, that guy gets paid fucking millions of dollars and made the Pro Bowl. He might get an edge. And so there was this weird, instead of, and maybe it was just the coaches I played for, like, hey, shit happens, right? But if you continue to make the same mistakes, the same outcome is going to happen. So you have to learn from your mistakes. There was no teaching moments. And it was maybe because the coaches I had weren't maybe great coaches. Even though they were in the NFL, people thinks that everybody's fucking great. Like
interesting.
Yeah. I played. So, I really liked my coach my rookie year, or for when I was at the Eagles. He was a good coach. Wasn't an offensive lineman by trade. And so was coaching off of clinic film and what other people were doing and had theories about it. The technique that they were coaching me on was the wrong technique. So I ended up just figuring out, if I do what they're asking me to, I'm going to get fucking cut. So I'm not going to fucking do that. And it's not what they wanted, but I was successful. And then all of a sudden, shortly they're like, hey, can we come film this as clinic film? And I developed, and I always tell young guys, it's what I told the guy I worked with this year. You have to figure out what your wheelhouse is and what you do well, and then do that to perfection. And some of the young guys would come in, and I'd watch them and be like, "Fuck, man! They're coaching these guys to do a certain thing that is outside their skill set. Instead of figuring out what they can do, all we're doing is figuring out what they can't." And so a big thing for me is looking at the individual. What's your skill set? How do we break this thing down? And then you basically make every player successful by doing what allows them to do it, instead of just trying to jam a bunch of fucking square pegs into round holes, which is what happens a lot in the NFL.
So just learned something. And as you're explaining that, my experience was very different than your experience from my setting, from my environment.
Oh, I believe it 100%. In special operations with you guys, you're asking high valued, intelligent individuals to go in and solve complex problems on the fly that if they don't solve them, people die. In the NFL, you have some incredibly physically gifted individuals who have a very unique skill set that are going to go out, coached by a bunch of people that probably never did the job, that are out there playing fantasy football.
Almost all the time.
All the time. Yeah, I mean, look at these guys. You think fucking Sean McVay and these guys ever played football? No, it's fucking like you look at their coaching trees and this. I mean, there's some guys that have did, Vrabel was I played against Vrabel for a number of years, was watching him coach. So, I mean, there's guys, Belichick, I don't know what the fuck he did. But a lot of these individuals that are coaches did not play at a high level. And, organizational skills. I mean, Andy Reid didn't play at a high level, but, great organization, great coach in that regard.
That wouldn't work where I come from.
No,
it wouldn't. And that's a common thread of this guy's done this before.
Yeah. Well, in the NFL, that doesn't exist, right? It's not like you got Charlie Hustle, Pete Rose out there, who's, played 20 years and they brought him in as the last playing manager and he's out there fucking sliding in head first, calling, putting the lineups together. I made the joke to Andy Reid once. He didn't like this. I'm like, how come you fuckers don't wear the uniform? Baseball, those guys wear the uniform. They're all out there ready to play. You got fucking Charlie Hustle, Pete Rose, God rest his soul.
Exactly.
One of my favorite players. I mean, the fact that guy had the balls to bet on his team to win. Now, if he bet on his team to lose, I'd have a problem with it. No, he bet on his fucking team to win, and because he was out there making it happen. That just shows that you believe in yourself.
So I hope they get over this hurdle about him getting into the Hall of Fame, because he deserves to be there. He was a high-performing individual. Yeah, he was wildly flawed. He took that sport to another level. Guys, give him the accolade.
Yeah, he's the beast.
Acknowledge that he wasn't a perfect human being. And I'll tell you that all these high performers are not.
Baseball's cunty. Just like Pro Hall of Fame, super cunty. But what I was saying is I made that joke to Andy Reid and he got mad. But that was a big issue, is part of the reason I've always had a hard time with people using the coach moniker for me. Oh, good job, coach. Because I had this conception in my mind that coaches were usually dudes that were wearing shorts with a whistle screaming at me while I was working. Right? It was real easy for the coach to stand there and yell and scream, and you need to do this and this as they walk over, and they're not out there in the gear. They're not fucking hitting anybody. It's really easy to be the guy who's fucking yelling and never having done it. And listen to these coaches fucking go sideways, and I'm like, fucking strap it up. I'll fucking give you my pads. Go put the fucking helmet on. Let's watch you fucking do this. Oh, that's not what I do. I'm like, well, you're not helping these fucking guys. And that shit, and it's probably why I didn't get into coaching, was, players play, those who can't play, those who can't coach. And I had this like negative feeling of like coaches were dudes that watched me work in the sun. And, so I've since changed a bunch of perception on that and the coaching idea and helping people along. But even why I've, worked with NSW and, be able to work with other pro athletes is because I still view myself as an athlete that's able to work and help other athletes be better versions of themselves. But the one thing I've always respected a ton about special operations and NSW especially is that like nobody's leading them or kicking in the door. That like there's nobody on a call or there like
except for the officer.
Yeah, but you guys still have to go through BUD/S.
Oh yeah,
you still have to go through all the training. Like there's no like
you have to meet the bar on everything.
Yeah, like there's nobody that's a SEAL that didn't have to go through the pipeline, and it didn't matter if you were an enlisted guy and an officer. You were all treated the same,
and that's intentionally built into the assessment and selection process for all special operations. Officers go through it right next to the enlisted guy, and often the rank doesn't matter. You're all being assessed on the same attributes. But so you have changed my perception on that. Again, you read a lot of books on sports teams. You naturally think these great coaches are exceptional leaders.
The Bill Belichick thing is interesting because I was there. Bill Belichick, you know how he gets up in front of the media and he's very monotone. He says, that's exactly how it was all the time. It was almost as like, you're lucky to fucking be here and I don't have to acknowledge you because you're a piece of shit. That was the Bill Belichick way.
Do your fucking job.
Well, and which is fine. Do your fucking job. But as a veteran,
which I do agree. There is a high degree of that.
I'm a big fan of that. Yeah. Like go out, be successful. I shouldn't have to fucking shake your hand, but I also think you can be a fucking human. And
empathetic.
Yeah. And you know what? Part of the reason was, he gets ousted, Brady doesn't have it anymore. And I also believe a lot of Bill Belichick's insecurity happens from the point where people are like, is it Belichick or is it Brady? And then when Brady leaves and wins a Super Bowl and Belichick tanks, and all of a sudden it's like, was it the fact that he just happened to have the best quarterback forever and the guy was willing to take less money and play and do all these things? I mean, whereas Belichick believed it was all him.
Or is there a degree that Belichick knew how to build the right team until I know Brady.
Well, yeah, I mean, he brought on people, but I mean, you brought on a guy like, Wesley Welker, and you bring on these other guys that were.
God, watching Welker get hit just every time was painful.
But you think like those guys would have never played on any other teams. Nobody else. I mean, but they came into this situation. So was that Pioli or Belichick, figuring these guys out a system? Yeah. Probably. But it didn't work without the fucking massive cog. Because all of a sudden they get rid of the cog and, he says to the owner, hey, Brady doesn't have, we got to get rid of him. And Robert Kraft fucking cut off Belichick's head because Brady still had it. I mean, maybe it was some other reasons. So I think there's an ability to do that job. And I've always respected coaches that have played like, the guy in Detroit who was a tight end for Dallas. We're actually about the same age. I mean, he's a solid coach and like, passionate dude. And, I think players respond to people kind of like in your situation, players respond to people that have done it before. I know when I met offensive line coaches like Mike Munchak and some of these other, Ed White and some of these guys that were absolute fucking legends, like meeting those, there was reverence. Like, hey, like, fuck, dude, that guy, I mean, I've watched this guy play. Like, I was excited to meet him. And you start talking the game and, they're talking from not only a point of a coach, but also personal, experience. And, hey, when I did, this is what we did in this, like, you respect those people more so than a guy be like, oh, what'd you do? Well, I started in the equipment room. I started cutting tape. And next thing you know, they needed a job. So now I'm an offensive line coach. And that shit happens. And you're like, Jesus Christ, this guy was a fucking film guy. And this guy's fucking talking to me about offensive line play. Like that shit happens.
That's insane. I will say this. My experience was where empathy meets accountability. And we had leaders that, again, set up training to be hard, set up training to fail, but were there to pick you up and coach you on what you did wrong or what a right decision looked like. And the old adage, and you've heard this, the more you bleed in training, the less you bleed in war. It stands true. Teams don't rise to the occasion. They fall to their level of training. But to your point about, while on a mission, it's old Mike Tyson's like, everyone
Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
We say no plan survives first contact, and it rarely ever did because the enemy gets a vote. You have a plan, you go in there, the enemy reacts a different way than what you had planned. Guys were very good at making a quick decision once we hit a contingency to alternate the plan on the fly. And because they were trained so well together for 1 year or 2 years, or they were together for 4 or 6 years, they could read and react off one another when, I'll say it, shit hit the fan. I was wildly impressed by how many times our plan didn't hold true. The guys would they'd adapt very quickly. They'd innovate very quickly. Again, that agility, and then just keep driving, knowing that what the end state, what the overall goal that we were trying to achieve, the mission we were trying to achieve, and that they never lost sight of that. I mean, that's why if you look at the process, we read the mission statement during the briefing multiple times. You read it once and you actually say, I'll say it again. And so that everyone understands why we're going out there, what needs to be accomplished, what success looks like. And when you know that, and you're so well trained, or you've been trained extremely hard, and you failed a lot in that training, guys will adapt very quickly to whatever situation is thrown their way. And that was, again, it goes back to what I call the brain trust. Just if you rely on them, and it did not matter if the senior guy had the best idea. It was best idea wins. And so Stephen Kotler, who studied special operations, a specific unit, came up with a term called dynamic subordination. And actually, there were studies.
We had him on the podcast.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Good man. And what it is that like positional leadership doesn't really work during those situations. It's who has the most expertise or situational awareness will step up at that time, and everyone will follow them regardless of rank. And that dynamic subordination flows throughout the mission. It's not like an officer is going to go up to a door and be like, no, I'll place the breach. The breacher's in charge for that moment, and he'll tell me to go piss off and move 100 yards away, and I'm fine with that.
Sure.
And that's why I think the business world's fascination of special operations is so high, and for good reason. Yeah. But not everything is a parallel. Yeah. And you can't attain certain things.
Well, it could be also that there's a bunch of people in business that just want to bring in a bunch of special operations guys to 100%. Hear fucking war stories.
And here's the thing is I don't tell war stories.
No, but like it's for the same right. I was on a podcast yesterday, and I always get who's the toughest player?
Yeah.
And they want to hear these stories. And they always look so deflated when I'm like, everybody was really fucking good. And every week I had some all-pro or some future Hall of Famer, or this guy that was this and this. I mean, like there was never a week where you looked at it and thought, oh, this is a fucking week off. Like, this guy either got a new contract, this guy's in the Hall of Fame, this guy's this. I mean, like every fucking week, it was like the best players. The only thing you could hope for is that, you went on a long drive, you're beating the shit out of those dudes, and all of a sudden they rotated in their backup. All of a sudden you're like, oh, fuck, dude, the backup's in, thank God. And then you could fucking, maybe take a moment to like catch your breath and not feel like you were going to get fucking exposed at any moment.
Alabama should have been thinking about that when they played Vanderbilt last.
That's ego.
That when you
dude, ego's killed more people than cancer. I mean, that's ego. Alabama got so big, and the ego is so big, the NLI and the money, like all we have to do is just show up. And then what happens is they need stark reminders. And that happens all the time.
Yeah. That was one. First time that Vanderbilt ever beat a top 5 team.
Did you see them carrying the goalpost?
Nashville was going off that night.
My God. Yeah. They carried it right down Broadway.
That's what's so amazing about that's why I love sports so much. Is it on any given Sunday, Saturday
or even Saturday,
the number one team can be brought down by somebody who's not even ranked because they walked in with complacency, saying, "Oh, these guys aren't all that good. That we're going to run right over them." And those guys were so ramped up to bring the fight, and that's what happened with Vanderbilt.
Well, what you have to expect is that you're everybody's Super Bowl. And that's what I think, Andy Reid was actually really good with this because we had won a ton of games. And he made an interesting point at one time where he's like, every game that we go play, it doesn't matter if it's in the preseason, the first game, or the end of the year in the playoffs, because we had so much success, everybody is going to gauge their team and their season and kind of how things are going based upon how they do against us. And when you get to the point, I mean, same thing with the Patriots. They'd won so many Super Bowls in this that every team that was going in to play, it was their Super Bowl, right? Because if you knock off Brady, you knock off this, like, hey, well, it wasn't a great season. We won't beat the Patriots. like that's how it was. Where every game, like you wanted to be one of those teams. You wanted to be the team. Like I remember we were running the ball really well, and we had a good team, and we ended up and played Detroit, and Detroit was having a fucking abysmal season. And those dudes, those dudes came out for some fucking reason with their ears pinned back and beat the shit out of us. And I remember like they were celebrating like this moment was like what was going to, carry their season. And I remember thinking like, fuck, dude, like the team that we saw on Sunday, we hadn't seen that team yet. And I was like, what is it about us? Like, how come we can't catch these guys on their off day? And like, it's just, we just didn't get it.
And that's what's great about any sports, but you'll watch a team who's at the top of their conference come in against a team that's in last in the AFC, West.
Yeah.
And they're 5-0 and they go up against a team that's 1-4.
And they just get smoked.
16-37.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You're just like, what happened on that day?
And the people that are betting on this are even pulling their hair out too.
Yeah.
Final one. Mentorship's a big part of the SEAL teams, right? So in terms of like developing the next generation of leaders, we talked about it, but like that piece of mentorship, was there a moment when you were a young SEAL that you were mentored by somebody individually or like personally, or just somebody who, really gave you some sage advice that helped you on the road that you were able to hand off later down the road when you were an older SEAL to a younger guy?
So that's how the culture is built. It's again, the empathy meets accountability. And accountability is training the next generation to exceed the bar of performance. And that's why when somebody does something wrong, they hold you accountable, not out of this external punishment, but because they care and they want to see you carry that, the reputation of that community far into the future after they leave. That's the whole point. But the guy who comes to mind that blew me away was, and I learned a lot from him. And then I started pouring into the younger generation. And I had the luxury of for a very short period, 6 months, I was the junior officer training course director at BUD/S. And that's once the young SEALs officers, go through the grueling 8-month part, I get them for 30 days to train them into become ground force commanders. I freaking loved it. They were sponges. They wanted to know everything. I had limited experience at the time. I had 3 combat deployments, 3 Iraq deployments, Battle of Ramadi, Battle of Sadr City. So probably not the best instructor because I was at the peak of Mount Stupid, the Dunning-Kruger effect, but at least I knew something, or I knew more than them. And so I'd arm them with what I knew, but that was one of the most rewarding tours I ever had outside of the combat deployments. But Chris Fussell ended up being my squadron commander. And Chris Fussell wrote the book. He actually helped pen the book Team of Teams by Stanley McChrystal. His mentor was Stanley McChrystal. He was a mentee to McChrystal. And then I ended up, after this guy gets a masterclass education in leadership, he ends up being my squadron commander. And I remember the first time he says, hey, all the officers in the squadron, I want you in my office at 10:30 on Friday. And dude, you at that East Coast team, you are running, your hair's on fire. I mean, you've got to train, you got to meet all these standards. Things are always going on. You're always spinning on things. And my first reaction was like, this is bullshit. I got shit to do. Like, we need to be on the water. Guys need to be training. And so first time we come into his office, I sort of have the crossed arms. And he's like, I want 1 hour every Friday with you guys just to do a little leadership development. We'll talk about different things. We'll talk about combat missions and tactics and strategies. We'll just talk about leadership. And like, I was craving that. I was looking forward to that every Friday to the point where he canceled one point. I remember, and hopefully I didn't do it too unprofessionally. I'm like, hey, what the fuck, man? You can't just cancel those. We're all blocking our calendar for that. And he's like, oh, okay, I got you. Like, we'll meet next Friday. But that guy poured into me, much like all the master chiefs and senior chiefs did. I mean, that was their job. You view them as like the wise old man, especially if they have a strong reputation. You're like, I'm just going to suck up everything that they know. And on the final day in that squadron, before I moved to another squadron, he was in a combat zone in a very senior position, the commander of that region. He forewent sleep that night to write me a 5-page email, which I still have and hung in my house. I'm going to show you this. Okay. Phenomenal. It gave me as much advice that he could moving forward of what he saw me do extremely well, what were potential cautionary areas based off what he had seen. And I've read that letter from Chris. I'm going to write a book about this thing. I got to reach out to Chris and see if he wants to write it with me, but like just a short 100-page book. I've spoken about that letter more times to companies than I can count now. But just the fact that he, was probably getting 4 hours of sleep a night, just decided not to sleep that night to write me this letter, to bid me farewell, and give me very sage advice. It was, I still hold that thing dear. That's the power of truly exceptional leaders, is that they inspire people. Your span of control, and people get this wrong, based off industrial organizational psychology, they've shown that your span of control, people that you can actually manage, is not beyond 15 people. But your ability to inspire is just limitless. And Chris went on to be the president of McChrystal Group, the consulting firm. I think he's now on the board. But it didn't stop there. Again, I can name Master Chiefs who I just absolutely just held them in such high respect. And you just watched how they deal with people, how they dealt with problem sets. And sometimes the greatest mode of learning is observational or behavioral modeling. And you would just model yourself after them without them having to actually explain their philosophy or their method to how they deal with certain things. But mentorship is high. And then when I got the opportunity and I truly understood from the Marine Corps and the SEAL teams that I was a product of a lot of great coaches and mentors, I started pouring into the officers. So on deployment, I'd have, some what we call junior officers within the joint, our JOC. And if we had nothing going on that night, I'd pull them to the team room where we brief the missions, and we would do a sand table, and I'd pull out a mission that I ran in Iraq where I probably just messed up wildly, have them plan it without knowing what really happened, have them walk through it, brief it, and then I would tell them what happened in reality, where I screwed up, things I did right, and have them, talk through that with me. And we would just do that on the nights that we didn't have missions. And I loved it, man. And I took a lot of pride in the fact that a true leader has to put wins on the board. When anyone who says that outcome-based leadership is toxic, in my opinion, you're absolutely fucking wrong. Yeah. A college football coach will not stay in the position. The boosters will launch his ass in a heartbeat if he's not putting W's on the board.
Look at what happened to the guy at the Jets.
There you go.
Yeah. You're 20 and 32, and you're between week 5 and week 6, and they fired him. They didn't even let him talk to the team or the coaches. They came in. The owner came in and fired him, and then the security escorted him out.
I read that,
and I was like, "Good, you know how that fucking feels."
If I'm crying for him, not really, because he's getting paid $20,000 a day until his contract ends.
Yeah. No, he's got millions of dollars. Like, he's not upset.
I can't spend $20,000 a day.
It's but here's he has that dude's got a big sense of pride about him. There was like, and I don't know if you saw the clips, like before the games, he like runs stairs and he works out and this, and he shaves his head, and it's very, actually shiny. Polishes his head. So it fucking looks like a fucking snow globe. So he takes himself very seriously, and you could tell that, there's a lot of ego, and, he holds himself in high regard.
He'll survive.
Yeah, he'll be fine. But that interesting thing of him holding himself in high regard and the way that he was treated had to do more about either his interaction with the team or the owner, because how they did that was a huge fuck you. They could have walked in and said, hey, we're going to part ways. And then they let him talk to the team and his coaching staff, and he gets to say his goodbyes, and then they fucking move on. To have the owner come in, not talk to anybody, can him, and have security, and then the owner come in and tell the team and the staff that we fucking fired him. That's a massive fuck you. Like something happened either in an exchange or I do like the fact that Aaron Rodgers was like, I didn't have anything to do with this. And yet he's been a part of 2 staffs where they've let the coaches go during midseason. I don't know. He's a Cal guy, so he's a Cal Bear. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, but it just seems a little suspect.
Aaron Rodgers is, I've got a lot of respect for Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah. I do too. And he's like, I can't believe people think I have this much power. I'm like,
so I'll finish this. The number one job is to drive outcomes, but right butt up against it is your ability to create the next generation of leaders that are better than you. It's no different than parenting. Yeah, I think this is a relatively true statement. As a parent, you want to develop kind, empathetic, respectful, competent human beings who contribute to society, but more importantly, have the ability to fall down, learn from it, get back up, and then train the next generation to do the same. That's probably fairly accurate, or within a ballpark of what you would agree. So, training those leaders, and I have no doubt that and I'm not over exaggerating my influence on NSW whatsoever, but I hope that I helped some of the officers that are now leading SEAL teams become the leaders that they are, and history will tell that. But that's what I got from the military, and that's what I love so much. And then great business leaders did that. There's a guy named Bill Campbell, who actually, Pennsylvania, coal mining town, dirt poor. Believe he went to Brown, played football at Brown, but then coached at Boston College as an assistant, and I think was the head coach at Brown. Broke out of football, went to Kodak during the heydays of Kodak, eventually became the director of the board for Apple. He was at Apple and CEO of Intuit. I mean, he was known as the $1 trillion coach, still had that football mentality, phenomenal leader. But if you talk to people in Silicon Valley, they'll be like, yeah, Bill Campbell was instrumental on my development as a leader. And we're talking about some of the elite, like Steve Jobs, who's no longer with us, but Sergey Brin, Mark Benioff, and Ben Horowitz, and Mark Andreessen. I mean, these guys have written books about him. There is a book called $1 Trillion Coach, but those guys actually put time into developing the leaders below them. And what they understand too is that if you develop your people so rapidly, much like General McChrystal, team of teams, that your job becomes a lot easier.
Yeah. And
people lose sight of that. What we did personally when I switched to the business world and I started Talent War Group, which we're about to be acquired, Victory,
nice,
by a great guy named Kirk O'Fell, Overwatch, who will be publishing his podcast at a data center podcast on the Everyday Warrior Nation. We didn't have the money, because I self-funded everything, to go out and hire these expensive executive search consultants. So we hired from St. Edward's, which is a university here in Austin. We hired poor, hungry, and smart. And what we would do every day is 30 minutes in the morning at 8 a.m. or was it 9 a.m., come in and we would do 30 minutes of leadership development for these young college graduates. And we saw them maturate. And that could be anywhere from communication to email, to dealing with clients, to time management, to, accountability. We saw them maturate at such a level that it was phenomenal. And some of them have left the organization and are doing just extremely well at a young age. And that right there, that's a badge of honor for me. And we loved them, and we wanted to see them become better leaders than we were. And I think in time that will happen. And it's amazing when you nurture someone, when you put the time in, and you've got to find the time. Don't tell me that you don't have time. When you put the time in, that impact, that inspiration, it becomes a fire in them. And if they're people that are just not driven, then eventually you got to cut them away. And you're actually doing them a service when you cut them away, because they'll go find a culture where it's a good fit for them. But no, the development from where I came from was massive, and I think that was a major key to success in everything that we did.
Awesome. Well, dude, that was awesome. I'm glad that we were able to get through those questions and understand a little bit about leadership. You have such a unique perspective on, not only your time at the Marines and the SEALs, and then working with JSOC, and then also getting out as an entrepreneur and putting all this stuff together. So thanks for taking the time.
Well, I will say one caveat is the SEALs and JSOC doesn't happen without my time in the Marine Corps. Marine Corps is one of the most unique organizations. You hit it early. They hold a standard, dude. And if you don't hit that standard, they're going to make sure they find a way for you to hit that standard.
So when I went in and did pretty extensive talking about when they, with the Army's new fitness readiness test, and like they were kind of transitioning in like the PT and the ACFT and all that. So I went around and I spoke at the War College and different things on like the history of PT tests. And the joke that I was always bring up is, they spent millions of dollars on equipment and doing all this other stuff. And a guy asked a question, was there an easier way to do it? I said, 100%. Look at the Marines. And what do the Marines have in their PT test that nobody else has? Pull-ups. And you can't do pull-ups with a fat ass. So if you want to fix all these problems, you could have spent millions of dollars, or you could have just put pull-ups in, and you would have just segregated and got rid of a ton of these people. And they were like flabbergasted. I'm like, you didn't have to spend millions of dollars on trap bars and all this other stuff and spend all this time to redesign it. All you got to do is put in a pull-up. Just give me one. And if we that was the standard across all armed forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, everything, one pull-up, one legit pull-up. And then after that one legit pull-up, you can go on.
The whole career was pull-ups. Yeah.
But you have to remember the Army.
Not for the regular.
The Army has done everything they can to avoid putting a pull-up in a PT test. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars, new team, this, all they had to do was put a pull-up in.
Have you ever worked with the 75th? Because they were...
Yeah, we worked with the 18th Airborne Corps.
Okay.
Yeah, so we worked with the 101st, the 82nd. We worked with all of them.
The 75th Ranger Regiment, and this is just my perspective, they really doubled down on the human performance.
Yeah.
I mean, they were bringing in great human performance coaches, more so than some of the other units. And they're young.
Yeah,
but those kids were
but you have to remember that there was a Army fitness test, the ACFT and the PT test, which was sit-ups, push-ups, and run, that everybody has to do, and that they've tied it to employment or into moving on and get basically advancement. So you had these dudes that were just basically jacked up backs because all they do is work on sit-ups, a bunch of like weird shoulder injuries from shitty push-ups, and chin splints because all they did was run. They didn't do any strength training. And then all of a sudden, what do? They bring in the ACFT and they have to change it. They're going to do all this stuff. And I'm like,
is that the ammo can runs?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, they had a trap bar deadlift and this. I mean, they added all this stuff to make it more athletic. And I sat at the work college and told them, I'm like, all you would have had to do was just put in pull-ups. Because here's the deal. To do a pull-up, you have to have trained other things. There isn't anybody who, unless you're a 135-pound dude who's just built like a rail, but pull-ups are a great high watermark. If you can do a pull-up, you're usually pretty fit.
And if you can do a pull-up with combat equipment on, which is basically, in reality, trying to get a scale a wall. When I think about it, the Navy PFT, which we still had to take in the SEAL teams, was sit-ups, push-ups,
and a run. Well, yeah, it's because...
Was there a swim in there?
Because you could do it anywhere. And I went through all the history of the PT test, and what happened was World War I, we pulled kids off of the farm. Right. And they didn't have to do anything. There was no deployments. We sent those kids to war. They didn't come home until the war was won. There was so there were people that were over in theater for 4 or 5 years, but all those kids were pretty fit because they were all farm kids. They made the grenades the size of a baseball and they just let those kids go out there. They gave them guns. They all could shoot and hunt because we were pretty rural. And then all of a sudden we come back, World War II hits. They bring in and they do physicals for the draft. And it was 75% of the applicants failed.
In World War II.
Yeah, World War II.
Which they got rid of that standard.
Well, they didn't have a PT because the problem was after World War I, a lot of those kids never went back to the farm, right? The cities grew and, it was more situation. They started drafting people and there was this massive tank of physical readiness because these kids weren't doing farm work. They were city kids. So then after World War II, they figured out we got a problem. So they put a PT test in, and the original PT test after World War II, was kind of a motherfucker. It was it involved pull-ups and push-ups and running and this, and you had to do a whole bunch of get over obstacles. It was kind of an obstacle course thing. And that looked pretty good. And then all of a sudden you get to the 80s and it's jogging. And then, everybody, then it was be all you can be. And, to be fit in America in the 80s, you had to jog. I mean, even my parents fucking jogged. I remember my parents.
That was such an 80s, 90s thing.
Oh my God,
I'm going to go run the New York Marathon. Good luck with that.
Oh, I remember my parents would put on their running shoes and they had their little running outfits and they would go for a jog and we would ride our bikes. And I just remember thinking this is so nerdy.
So good.
And, and that was part of the deal. And, now all of a sudden we're in this situation, but the reason we went in to work with the 18th Airborne Corps was they had a massive amounts of people on profile that were non-deployable. So of the 80 or 90,000 that they had, there was a third of them were on profile, 15 to 20% of them were undeployable due to injuries. And so they brought us in and I was like, well, here's the deal. What's driving your advancement and what's driving your people is a push-up, sit-up, and a run test. And then you wonder why all of these injuries are overuse injuries because they're not training anything other than the test.
Measure what matters.
Yeah. And so then all of a sudden we came in, we implemented power athlete systems with a bunch of people. Every one of them maxed out their PT test and injuries went away. So much so that we were in process to try to bring this across the 18th Airborne Corps for everybody. And then they launched this ACFT thing, which I went and spoke on and they spent tens of millions of dollars. People got extremely rich.
Does. That's what the military does.
Yeah, throw money at a problem with hardware, but God knows if you teach somebody how to do something and they leave with a measurable skill, now all of a sudden you're not going to be able to fucking count that. As I was told, it's the Army only spends money on bullets, beans, and bombs and boots. Bullets, beans, bombs, and boots. That's it. If it's not in those, it's not going to get sold.
Well, you're talking about DOD, which couldn't account for $685 million last year.
Yeah, that wasn't us.
Yeah, that's the military, and that is such a black eye in the military that would you say 75, or you said 25% of the people were on profile?
It was more than that. It was like 20. Yeah, of the 90,000, there were 20 to 30,000 were on profile, and 10 to 15% were non-deployable.
And you got to ask what the leadership's doing. Like,
well,
what are you doing?
General LaCamera was the guy that brought us in, who was the 4-star, and he came from special operations in the Rangers. Yeah, monster. I had. Probably one of my greatest experiences in terms of working with the 18th Airborne was making a friendship with General LaCamera and getting time to spend with him and talking to him. I mean, he recommended books to me. And if I could have gone into some form of leadership program with that dude, I would have been fucking over the moon.
And are you talking about the Army infantry units within the 18th Corps? Or were they pretty...
Well,
because I know the Marine Corps infantry probably doesn't have that problem.
No, but you have to remember the U.S. Army is like a corporation. So you might be in the 18th Airborne Corps, you might be in the 101st this. I mean, I remember when we went in and did all of our tests, we asked for just every MOS, right? Just give us just everybody. I'd have a dude, probably the gnarliest job I came across was there was a dude who was a frontline airborne generator mechanic. So he jumps out of a plane with all of his fucking tools because he's a generator mechanic. And then he lands in forward operating, and then he has to fix, the big missile battery things. Those are run by generators. And so he has to fix the electrical because they're actually in sand and heat are the two things that electricity hates the most. I was going to say,
and he's doing it in 110 degree heat index.
In that they jump him in with his equipment and his rifle. And then a lot of those are in forward operating things. So there may be this, and that dude is literally going into these generators, trying to figure out why they're not going and doing, this basically fucking risk assessment. Why aren't they, what parts do I need? Calling another guy, he's jumping in parts. So as I'm talking to that guy, I'm like, okay, single most ridiculous job I've ever heard. And then the other guy is like, oh, this guy's this guy's a soldier. This guy's in the motor pool. Oh, this chick is a secretary. And they're all soldiers, and they all have to do the PT test. So the problem is, and you get to special operations, you get to DevGru or the SEAL teams, you have guys that are legitimate SEALs, door kickers, you got support staff, but there, the Army is a massive corporation, and I think at least in my set, because we'd worked with kind of special operations where everybody was kind of a tip of the spear door kicker. Now all of a sudden I'm in teaching these seminars, and I got a chick who's a physician's assistant and a secretary, and then in the motor pool and this, and they're like, I'm never going to see combat. Why do I have to do this shit? And it was because
you're in the military.
Yeah.
And I mean, you look at World War II, it was Saving Private Ryan is a perfect example when the guy was like a typewriter specialist or something like that, and ends up in a platoon carrying a rifle. That's why the concept of every Marine is a rifleman is that even if you're what we call admin, that if numbers are low in an infantry battalion, they're also trained with basic infantry skills that they can go supplement those units.
Yeah, but
that didn't happen during the Global War on Terror.
But that's how it should have been, right?
That's what happened in World War II and World War I.
Like with Marines, every man's a rifleman. They didn't necessarily like it when I asked them, well, how do I fix this problem? I'm like, I think you use the Marines as when you tell a bunch of
the right answer.
Well, no, but it was being honest. I'm like, there is no everybody is a forward operator. Everybody has that hanging over them. I don't know how you ask people to come and do this job and be like, oh, you're going to, be all you can be in Army, but no, you're going to just push papers around and never going to be forward. So why do you have to do this? Whereas in the Marines, it was different. But my whole thing was, and you should have heard the reaction when I said pull up. They're like, we can't ask these people to do pull-ups. And I'm like, every human being. I remember 6th grade, I failed the presidential physical fitness test because I couldn't do a pull-up. So then every day I went out there and I was like, fuck, I'm going to do this flexed arm hang thing. So I jump up there and do the flexed arm hang where you could if you did it for an amount of time, you could pass. And ended up probably just working on that way too much. And then the next year I came back and I had pull-ups and was able to pass.
Yeah.
But the shame of not getting that, because I mean, at the end of the year, they brought all the people up and I didn't get it, even though I passed everything because I couldn't do fucking pull-ups. And I'm like, dude, a little bit of shame and a little bit of group,
mob mentality.
A little mob mentality.
Yes.
Sometimes will force people to do some shit. But I do feel that
Either get on board or get off the train.
I do feel like in the Army there was this feeling of mediocrity, and that's what General Cameron brought us there for. And right when we got to the point where we were going to launch it out, he ended up getting the job at PACCOM, and it wasn't the commander's intent for the next guy, and that was the end of our program. I would have loved to have done it. I think that would have been probably the greatest mark of power athlete to be able to go and influence those individuals.
Well, I think you would have had a worse experience if you went and worked with the Navy.
I have, other than working with NSW, I've never had to work with big Navy. We've worked with big Army. We've done some stuff with the Air Force, and anything we've ever done with the Marines has fucking been absolutely delightful. I like Marines. And my favorite to this point is I meet guys that are Marines, and based upon their tattoos, I can tell you about when they served. If they got a whole bunch of tribals like Blade, I know exactly when they served. And that's one of my favorites. They're like, oh 90s. My God, you're a Marine. Look at those tattoos. You guys like they hatched you guys like babies.
You knew they were 90s too if they had the tramp stamp on the back, or they were late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, where they all of a sudden they have all the tribals. I'm like, man, that's some 90s fucking Marine shit right there.
Yeah. So now it's much more artistic now.
Nice.
It's like art. Well, dude, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on Power Athlete Radio, dude, and I'm sure we'll be doing many more of these. See you. Hey there, Power Athlete Nation. Big shout out to all the heavy hitters who stuck around till the final whistle. If you've been soaking in the knowledge bombs and epic tales we've been dropping for free, here's your chance to be a game changer. Swing by klfi.com/powerathlete and toss a few bucks our way to keep the podcast fueled and firing on all cylinders. That's ko-fi.com/powerathlete. Your support makes a difference. See ya.